They tell you the void is empty. They are lying, and they know they are lying. And they sell you the lie the same way they sell you everything else out here, bundled, tithed, insured against loss, with a clause at the bottom in letters too small for an honest eye. I know this now. I knew it the moment the cold first touched the back of my hand and would not leave. But I am getting ahead of myself, and a good ledger is kept in order, and if there is one thing I was, before I was this, it is a man who kept his ledgers in order. My name was Garrett Holm. I set it down here the way a man sets down a coin he can no longer spend, to feel the weight of it one last time, to remember it had value once. I was a merchant, not a great one, not one of the gilded barons who buy and sell entire worlds across the dark, who carry charters older than the cities they ruin, and cruise larger than the populations of small moons. I was a middle thing, a hauler, a man with one tired ship and a manifest that never balanced quite the way I wanted it to, and a habit of telling myself that the difference between me and the great barons was luck, when the truth was always that the difference was simply how much of myself I had not yet sold. The ship was called the Patient Dividend, and I loved her the way you love a thing that is slowly killing you, which is to say completely and without the sense to stop. She was old when I got her. The plasma dryers ran hot and prayed over. Her corridors smelled of recycled breath and machine incense, and the particular sweetish rot that gets into the walls of any vessel that has carried the dead. And she had carried the dead. Oh, she had carried so many dead. Though I did not understand the half of it until the end. I knew her every groan. I knew which stairwell would freeze your fingers to the rail in the deep watches, and which bulkhead would weep condensation, no matter how the heat was set. I knew her, I thought, the way you think you know a thing you have lived inside for years. I did not know her at all. You never know the cargo. That is the first rule of the trade and the last one, and like every rule out here, it is true in a worse way than they teach you. I want you to understand the kind of man I was when this began, because the horror is not that I was innocent. The horror is that I was not. I had cut corners. I had moved cargo I did not look too closely at. I had stood in my own hold and watched the indenture lines shuffle past me. Men and women bonded to debts they would never live long enough to repay, stamped and tallied and stacked like grain sacks against the long passage. And I had told myself the same thing every man in my trade tells himself. I did not make this galaxy. I only move what it sells. I told myself I was a small wheel in a vast machine, and a small wheel cannot be blamed for the direction of the cart. I believed that. I want you to know that I believed it, sincerely, the way a faithful man believes his prayers, because the thing that came for me knew that I believed it, and it used my belief against me with the patience of an auditor who has all the time there has ever been. But cold came first. I have to begin there, because it is where everything begins, the way a debt begins with a single figure in a single column and grows from there into a thing that owns you, that owns your ship and your sleep and the marrow of your bones. We were 3 months out of a place called Carrow's Reach when it started. Carrow's Reach was a wretched frontier station that clung to a dead moon like a tick on the flank of a corpse, all rust-streaked habs and black market berths in a single tithe shrine where a blind preacher sold absolution by the gram. I had done good business there, which should have warned me, because I had never once in my life done good business in a place that deserved the name. I was doing my accounts in my quarters, in the small hours of a watch, with the drives humming their devotional hum 2 decks below. I did my accounts by hand. I always did them by hand. The cogitators aboard the Patient Dividend were old, and they lied when they were tired, and a manifest that lies will see you airlocked or excommunicate or worse when the tithe assessors come aboard with their cold eyes and their colder stamps. So I did my columns with a brass stylus in a brass-bound book, the way my own mentor had taught me. Her name was Marla Quint. She had owned the ship before me. She was a hard woman with a soft hand for a stylus, and she had died in this same chair, in this same room, with a smile on her face that no one aboard could ever explain, and I had inherited her ship and her habits and, though I did not know it yet, her debt. I was on the entry for a consignment of recyc protein and counterseptics bound for a hive whose name I have since forgotten. I have forgotten so much. The book takes your memory the way the cold takes your fingers, a little at a time, and then all at once. I had just totted the column, and I had drawn the line beneath it, and the total was wrong. Not wrong the way a number is wrong when your arithmetic slips. I knew that wrongness. I had lived in it all my life, the small reconcilable errors of an honest column. This was wrong, the way a face is wrong when you catch it in a mirror, and it does not move the way you move. There was an entry at the bottom of the page that I had not written. The ink was my ink. I knew my own ink. The particular black I mixed myself from forged soot and oil. The hand was my hand. I knew my own hand the way you know your own breathing. The little hook I put on the tail of my fives, the way I crossed my sevens high and hard. It was unmistakably mine, and I had not written it. It read, Holm, G. 1. Received in good condition. Balance forward. 1 what? Received from whom into whose keeping? Balance forward to where, against what? I sat there in the humming dark with the page beneath my fingertips, and that was the first time I noticed that my hand was cold and the page was not. The cold was coming out of me, you understand. Not into me, out, as though something beneath my skin had begun very quietly to subtract. I told myself it was the recycle system failing again, the same lie the ship herself was always telling, and I crossed out the entry with a single firm line, and I shut the book, and I went to my bunk, and I did not sleep, and in the morning I told no one. That is the first thing I need you to carry with you through all the rest of this. An entry in my own hand that I did not write. A balance forward. Hold it. It will return. And it will return more than once. And the last time it returns, it will be too late for both of us, because by then you will have read too far, and the cold will already be in your hand. You feel it starting, don't you? There at the edge of the page. That is only the beginning of the dead. Read on. I cannot stop you, and you would not stop if you could, because you want to know how the account closes. Everyone always wants to know how the account closes. That is how they get you. I did not tell my crew. There were 11 of us aboard the Patient Dividend then, 4 more souls than she truly needed and 4 fewer than she wanted, which is the natural state of any honest hauler. And they were the usual void trade flotsam. Men and women who could not hold a respectable berth, and women and men who would not. I owed each of them the truth, and I gave them none. And I am setting their names down now, here, while they are still alive in the telling, because the ledger took them all in the end and wrote each of them in my hand. And I want them remembered by someone who knew them, and not merely by the cold book that keeps them now. My first mate was a sharp-tongued woman named Dell Asher, who could squeeze a profit out of hard vacuum, and had a laugh like a fuel line igniting, sudden and bright, and a little dangerous. She had run cargo since before I could hold a stylus, and she trusted nothing she could not put her hand on. And she was, in the end, the only one of us who was right about everything, and heeded by no one. My Ingenium was kept by a half-mechanical wretch named Travis Boone, more augmetic than flesh below the collarbone, who spoke to the ship's drives in a low devotional mutter, and oiled them with a tenderness he had never once shown a human being. He had given his body to the machine god a piece at a time, the way men out here give themselves away to everything, and he was at peace with it in a manner I envied and did not understand. There was a cook named Ophiel poisoned us slowly with recycle paste and seemed glad of the company. There was a gunner named Reyes who prayed to a tattoo of the saint on his own forearm, and there was a boy. The boy was a new sign-on we had taken at Carrow's Reach, a thin, pale thing named Wynne, who had stowed away in the water tanks, and been found half-drowned, and hauled out, and had begged, on his knees on my deck plates, to be allowed to work rather than be spaced. I had let him. I let him because Marla had let me once, when I was a stowaway half-drowned thing myself, and because a boy works cheaper than a man and complains less, and because, I will be honest, since honesty is the only currency I have left and it spends nowhere, because it cost me nothing to be merciful that day, and I have always been a man who took his mercy when it was cheap. He had a way of looking at things directly. The boy that should have made him a poor void trader, and somehow didn't. He learned the manifests fast. He asked good questions. He asked once why a hauler's ledger would carry a column for souls reconciled, and I told him it was an old administratum form line, vestigial, meaningless, the kind of thing that lingers in the templates for 10,000 years after anyone remembers what it counted. I believed that when I said it. I want that on the record. I believed it. The second sign came at the next port, and the second sign had a face. The port was a thing called Hadrek's Spire, a trade spike hung in the upper atmosphere of a sullen gas giant, all rust and incense and the endless grinding hymn of its machine shrines, a place where the air itself tasted of hot metal and the prayers never stopped because the prayers were what kept the gravity plating from failing. We put in to take on water, offload the protein, and sign for whatever cargo the assessors permitted us to carry onward. And it was there, in the assessor's office, in the brown gloom and the candle stink, that I first saw the reconciler. He was a small man, or he wore the shape of one. He had the grey robes of an administratum factor, the travelling kind, the clerks who walk the trade routes confirming tithes and balancing the great accounts of the Imperium against the small accounts of small men like me. There are tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. They are a feature of the dark, as ordinary as the cold and the incense. And I had stood before 100 of them in my life and signed 100 of their forms without ever once seeing the face of one. I should not have seen his, but he was at the back of the room, against the wall, and he was not assessing anyone, and he was watching me with a stillness that nothing living manages, the stillness of a column that has already been totted and only waits to be ruled beneath. When the harried under-clerk stamped my manifest and slid it back across the counter, the reconciler lifted a book of his own, a small pale-bound book, and made a single mark in it, one stroke. I watched him do it. The cold came up my arm to the elbow, and I told myself it was the incense making me lightheaded, the way I told myself everything. I want to be precise about him, because precision is the only dignity I have left, and I am running out even of that. He had a face I could never afterward describe, not because it was monstrous, but because it was unfinished, the way a sum is unfinished before the final figure is carried down. There was a blank readiness to it. His eyes were the color of old brass, of a tally token worn smooth by 10,000 hands. He carried that pale book, and when he wrote in it, he did not dip a stylus, and I made myself not wonder where the ink came from, and not wondering is its own kind of signing away. I know that now. He said nothing to me that day. He only watched and marked, and when I turned to look at him a second time, he was gone. And the underclerk swore no factor of that description had set foot in the office, and produced the duty roster to prove it. There was a single name struck through at the bottom of the roster in a hand I was already, against all reason, beginning to recognize. The hook on the 5, the hard-crossed 7. We left Hadrek's Spire with a hold full of machine parts and a contract I should never have signed. The contract is the third thing you must carry. Hold it now with the other two, the cold and the watcher, because all three will come together at the end, and you will need to recognize them when they do. The contract came from a factor's agent on the Spire, a fat, oily man named Corwin Vance, who smiled far too much and smelled of the sweet rot of the very rich, that particular decay that comes of a body kept alive too long past its term by money. He had cargo that needed moving fast and discreet, he said, and it paid double the going rate, and a merchant who turns down double the going rate is a merchant who will soon own no ship at all and be cargo himself. So I sat in his counting house, in a chair upholstered in something I chose not to examine, and I read his charter. I read it carefully. I read every charter carefully. I was famous for it in the small mean ports I frequented. Holm who reads the small print, Holm who never gets cheated, and that is the cruelest joke in all of this. The one I cannot stop turning over even now, with so little left of me to turn it with. I was careful. My carefulness did not save me. My carefulness was the very thing they were buying, because the part of the contract that mattered was not written in ink at all, and a careful man reads what is written, and what is written is never the debt. I signed where the cross was marked. The pen Vance gave me was cold, colder than the room, cold as the crates would later be, and a cross mark on the page warmed under the nib. As I signed, warmed and seemed to take, to drink, and I felt, I swear this on the empty void that is not empty, I felt a small tug somewhere beneath my breastbone, as though a fine thread had been knotted to something inside me and given a single experimental pull, testing the line. Vance smiled his rotting smile and rolled the charter and sealed it with grey wax and gave me my copy, and I folded it into my strongbox and did not look at it again for a long time. That was my error, the great one, the one that swallowed all the smaller errors of my life the way the dark swallows a guttering lumen. Not violently, just completely, just closing over. The cargo was 40 sealed crates, heavy and cold to the touch. Colder than the refrigerated hold around them, which should have been impossible, which I noted at the time the way you note a thing you mean to think about later, and then mercifully never do. The manifest called them components, reclaimed, grade indeterminate. I did not open them. A discrete contract pays double precisely so that you will not open the crates. That is the whole of the arrangement. That is what the extra money is for. I am not a fool. I knew I was carrying something I should not. I told myself it was unsanctioned tech, or weapons, or relics looted from some dead and forbidden world, and that whatever it was not my sin, because I did not make the galaxy, I only moved what it sold. I had a litany for it by then, smooth as a prayer bead from handling. I only move what it sold. I only move what it sold. 3 days into the warp passage, the boy Wynne came to me white as a void corpse, and said the crates were breathing. I went down to the hold with him. I took a lumen and a maul, because I told myself I would crack one crate to settle the boy's nerves, and find it packed with cob teeth and old armor plate, and that would be the end of it. The hold was colder than it had any right to be. The refrigeration was running at quarter load, and yet my breath came out in plumes, and the rails burned my palm with cold. The 40 crates sat in their racks in the swimming green half-light, and as I stood among them, I could hear it, under the engine hum, under the constant grinding warp song that gets into your teeth on a long passage, a sound slow and wet and rhythmic, 40 separate slow tides, not quite in time with one another, a sound exactly like a long dormitory full of sleepers breathing in the dark. The cold off the crates was a pressure on the skin, and when I set my bare hand against the nearest one to steady myself, the cold went into me all the way to the shoulder, and on the back of that hand, where the cold had first touched me months before, a mark rose up beneath the skin, a single dark stroke, like a vein gone wrong, a tally mark, the same mark the reconciler had made in his pale book on the spire. I did not crack the crate. I am not proud of that, and I have had a very long time to be ashamed. A braver man would have taken his maul to the seal and let the warp take the consequences. A better man would have done it to all 40. But I was not brave, and I was not good. I was careful, and a careful man does not break a seal. He has been paid double not to break, not even with the dead breathing in the dark all around him. I took the boy back up the freezing stairwell, and I told him it was thermal contraction, ship settle, the ordinary groans of any vessel under warp stress, and he wanted so badly to believe me that he did. And I almost believed myself. That night I dreamed of columns, endless columns of figures scrolling up out of the black, and at the bottom of every page my own name in my own hand, Holm, G1, balance forward. In the dream I understood, the way you understand things in dreams without being told, that the columns were a manifest, and that I was on the manifest, and that I was on the manifest, and that I had been on it for a very long time, since before the spire, since before I bought the ship, perhaps since before I was born, that I had perhaps always been cargo, bonded, bound, received in good condition, being moved slowly, with great patience and good refrigeration, toward a destination I had signed for without ever reading the destination clause. I woke with the mark on my hand grown to 2 strokes and a third beginning. This is the place where a wiser man would have turned the ship. I want you to know there were ports we could have run to. There were authorities, the arbites with their shock mauls and their incorruptible boredom, the ecclesiarchy who would at least have given the breathing crates a name and a doctrine, even the cold mercy of the Inquisition, who would have ended the whole matter cleanly with fire and a sanctioned shell and not asked me to pay for the privilege of being saved. I thought about every one of them in the long watches of that warp passage, lying in my bunk with the tally marks itching under my skin, and the breathing of the crates seeping up through the deck plates into the very floor of my dreams. And I did none of it. None. And I have to tell you why. Because the why is the whole black heart of this account. The figure at the bottom of every column. I did not turn the ship, because turning the ship would have cost me money, the double rate, the contract, and Vance's people, who were not the kind to forgive a broken charter, and were certainly the kind to collect on one. My standing in the only ports that would have me. I sat there in the dark, and I weighed the breathing of the dead in my hold against the figures in my book, and the figures won, the way the figures had won every contest of my life, because I had spent 50 years training myself to let the figures win. And you do not unlearn 50 years in 3 nights of bad dreams. I told myself I would deliver this cargo and take this one last unclean payment, and never ever sign another discreet contract as long as I lived. I told myself that, fully aware that it was a lie, the way you tell a dying man that he is looking well. So I did not turn, and the patient dividend bore me onward through the screaming colorless dark, toward the place where the account would at last be reconciled. We came out of the warp at the consignment point, and the consignment point should not have existed. It was a station, but it was on no chart I owned, and no chart I would later learn that anyone owns. It hung in the absolute dark with no star anywhere near it. That was the first wrongness Dell saw, before I saw any of it. A vast grey thing, blank-walled, featureless, no imperial aquila stamped upon its flank, no honest running lights, no name in any tongue of man. There was only a single cold blue glow somewhere deep within it that pulsed slow and wet and exactly in time with the breathing of the crates. 2 decks below my feet, the Vox came alive on its own. I want to be clear about that. I did not hail the station. The station hailed me, opened my own Vox from the other side without a handshake or a code, and a voice that I knew, that I had been waiting to hear again without ever admitting to myself that I was waiting, said, calm and grey and unhurried, "Home, G. The account is ready for reconciliation. You are expected." And it was the voice of the small unfinished factor from Hadrek Spire, the reconciler, and in that moment I understood, with a lurch like a deck dropping out from under me, that he had never left my ship at all, that he had been aboard the whole passage, that the cold in the freezing stairwell and the weeping bulkhead had been him all those years, on this ship and on Marla Quince before me, that he was simply where the debt was, the way a shadow is simply where the light is not. Del Asher came to me on the command deck with her hand on the grip of the last pistol she was not supposed to carry. "Garrett," she said, very low and very fast, "there's no star. You hear me? There is no star out there. That station's not on any roll. The administratum keeps, and I have checked the roll. I keep my own copy. I keep my own copy of everything, and that thing is not on it, and the Vox opened from their side without a key. I have been running cargo since before you could hold a stylus, and I am telling you we burn for the warp right now, or I take this ship from you and do it myself. And I will, Garrett. I will not die in a place with no star." And I should have let her. Throne of Earth, and all the empty void. I should have stepped back from the helm and let Del Asher save every soul aboard. But the Vox crackled again, patient as a closing ledger, and the reconciler said, "Refusal of reconciliation incurs penalty. Penalty is itemized in the Charter, Clause 40, subsection 9. The merchant is advised to consult his copy." And so I went to my strong bucks, with Del shouting at my back, and I took out the charter I had folded away and not looked at since the Spire, and I read Clause 40, subsection 9 for the first time, and I learned at last what I had signed. The ink had changed, where there had been ordinary contract cant, the close-packed legal verbiage that no living man reads. There were now lines that moved when I looked directly at them and resolved into meaning only when I let my eyes slide off. And the meaning was this. I had not been hired to carry 40 crates. I had sold. The cargo was not Vance's. The cargo had never been Vance's. The cargo was mine. Clause 40, subsection 9. In letters that had never once been ink, the merchant pledges, as collateral against the value of all goods conveyed under this and all prior charters, his crew, entire and several, to be reconciled against the principal upon arrival, and pledges further his vessel, with all her fittings and her accumulated cargo of the kept, and pledges last and chiefest his own person, soul and substance, the said person being the final entry against which all preceding entries are at length to be balanced. The account, once opened, may not be closed, it may only be carried forward. I had pledged them, all of them, Del Asher, and Travis Boone, and Ophi the cook, and Reyes, who prayed to his own arm, and the boy Wynne, and all the rest. Every soul aboard, collateral against a debt I had taken on for double the going rate, and the breathing crates in my hold. I understood it then, in a single freezing rush that turned the cold in my hand to a kind of burning. The breathing crates were the previous merchants, the ones who had signed before me, 40 of them, kept and reconciled and carried forward. Components, reclaimed, grade indeterminate. I had been hauling my own future packed in ice across half the segmentum, and I had been too careful, too thrifty, too perfectly the creature of the ledger to break a single seal and look at the thing I was becoming. The reconciler boarded without a docking clamp. There was no clang of grapnels, no hiss of an airlock cycling. He was simply, between one breath and the next, on the command deck, standing in the blue light that now poured through the viewports from his nameless station, grey and small and patient, with his pale book open in his 2 hands. Dell shot him. She emptied the las pistol into him at 3 paces, the bolts cracking the air, and they passed clean through the grey of him and struck the bulkhead beyond and left there, in the metal, small neat smoking marks, tally strokes. He did not so much as turn his head. He looked at me, and only me, the way an accountant looks at the one figure on the page that has not yet been reconciled. The account has run long, he said. Most merchants reconcile within a single voyage. The desperate ones, the greedy ones, they reach the consignment point in a season, and they are crated within the hour, and there is very little to it. You were careful, and in the brass of his eyes there was something that, in a living thing, I might have called respect. Careful merchants take much longer. They read the charter. They hesitate. They turn the ship over in their minds 100 times in the dark, and never once turn it in truth. The hesitation extends the term of service considerably. The debt compounds in the interval. You have been a very good account, Holm G. You have been balancing forward for 19 years. 19 years. I had owned the patient dividend for 19 years. I had bought her from Marla Quint, who died smiling in this chair, and I had never once asked what she was smiling at. And now I knew, and the knowing was worse than any horror in the hold. She had been reconciled. Her long cold account had at last come due and been closed. No, not closed. The charter said accounts are never closed. Carried forward into me. The way it had been carried into her. The way it goes down and down through the careful and the thrifty and the small. Hand to hand, deed to deed. The wheel that turns the cart and never asks the road. She had smiled because she was passing the principal on. She had smiled at me. She had smiled because I had signed for the ship, and a man who signs for the ship signs for everything in the hold, and everything in the hold included the next merchant, and the next merchant was me. The breathing, I said. My voice did not sound like a thing a man would own. The crates. They're alive. They are kept, the reconciler said, as though that answered it. And perhaps in the only accounting that matters out here it did. Substance has value. We do not waste it. The body of a merchant who has spent his life learning patience and discretion, and the keeping of good order, is a valuable thing, and we keep it. Your crew will be added to the consignment. Your vessel will be retitled and made ready for her next master, who is even now somewhere out there, careful and thrifty, and certain he only moves what the galaxy sells. And you've... He turned a page in his pale book, and I saw it. I saw the columns from my dream scrolling up the surface of it from below. My own name 1,000 times in my own hand. Hook on the 5 hard-crossed 7. Balance forward, balance forward, balance forward. You have a choice, which is more than most accounts are granted, and which you have earned by your long and excellent service. You may be reconciled with your crew. Crated, kept, carried forward against the next merchant, and the next, until the principal is at last paid in full, which it never is, which it is designed never to be, the principal being the whole substance of a human soul, and the interest being merely the wish that it were otherwise. That is the first option, or. He let the oar hang in the freezing blue air, and the light pulsed, and the crates breathed, and somewhere below decks I could hear, faint and rising on the open vox, the sound of Travis Boone beginning to scream, and beneath his screaming, the small wet sounds of seals beginning, of their own accord, to open. Or you may take up the book, the reconciler said. The term is open. The work is steady. The galaxy is very full, Holm, of careful men with one tired ship and a manifest that will not quite balance, and every one of them must in time be visited and watched and brought home to reconciliation, and the visiting cannot be done by such as the station, which has no patience and no face. It must be done by such as me, by such as you. You understand the work. You have lived inside the work for 19 years without knowing its name. You would be very good at it. He paused, and the next thing he said almost gently, which was the worst of all of it. You would never be cold again. The cold, you see, is only the debt. It is the account subtracting you, drop by drop, against the day of reconciliation. But take up the book and the debt becomes your instrument instead of your sentence. The man who holds the tally does not feel its edge. The cold runs the other way, out of you, into them, and then his face for one instant finished itself. The unfinished blankness resolved, the final figure carried down, and it was my face, older, grayer, brass-eyed and patient, and entirely without fear, because it was a face that had nothing left to lose, because it had already sold all of it. It was the face of Garrett Holm, with the account at last brought into balance, and it was smiling, the way Muller Quint had smiled. Most who are offered the book refuse it, it said, in my own voice now. My own voice come back to me down 19 years. They cannot bear what it asks of them. The marking of others, the keeping of the kept. But you, Holm, you have spent your whole life telling yourself that you only move what the galaxy sells. Here, at the last, is your chance to be proven right, forever. I would like to tell you that I refused. I would like, more than I have ever wanted anything, to set down here that I chose the crate, that I lay down in the freezing hold with Dell and Travis and Ophi and Reyes and the boy Wynne, and let the seal close over me, and let the long, slow breathing take me down into the kept dark with my crew around me, and that there was at the very last that much honor left in the worn-out coin of me. But you have been reading my hand this whole while. You know my hand now. You know the hook on the 5, and the hard cross on the 7. And you know what kind of man keeps a ledger in such good order, through 19 years of carrying the dead. And so you already know what I chose, because you have felt the cold come into your own hand somewhere in the reading of this account, haven't you? There, at the edge of the page. The page is not cold. The cold is coming out of you. I took the book. They are kept now, my 11. I created them myself. That was the first task. The apprentice's task, performed under the watching of the old reconciler, the one I was replacing, for there is always one being replaced. The work goes on, and the workers are only ever carried forward, who stood by and marked my labor and found it good. And then, his own account at last balanced, lay down in the last empty crate himself, and let me close the seal on him, and smiled. Ophi went quiet, glad of the company even then. Reyes prayed to his arm until the cold took the arm. Travis Boone went on muttering devotions to the drives, content, I think, at the very end, to be made at last entirely into a component of a machine. Dell Asher fought me. She fought me to the airlock and back, and she did not stop fighting until the cold had taken the strength out of her hands. And the last thing she said to me was not a curse, which I would have deserved, but only my name, Garrett, like a question she already knew the answer to, and the boy. The boy Wynne looked at me while I closed his seal. He did not beg. I think that is the thing I will carry longest, longer even than the cold, longer than my own name when at last I forget it, that he did not beg. He looked at me with that direct way he had, the way that should has made him a poor void trader and somehow never did, and he said, "You let me work. Quint let you. I understand now. It just goes down, doesn't it? It just keeps going down. And then, because he was kind, and because the kind ones lie to the dying the way you lie to a man you love, he said, "It's all right, Mr. Holm. You only ever moved what it sold." And I closed the seal on his face, and his breathing joined the breathing of the others, slow and wet, and not quite in time. And that was the last of my crew and the first of my work. The work, since you will want to know. Everyone wants to know, in the end, what the work is. The way they want to know how the account closes. The work is patient, and it is endless, and it is, I will tell you the worst of it, it is not difficult. That is the thing they never warn you of in the recruiting cant of the trade, in the litanies the old haulers mutter over their cups in the mean ports, that the worst horrors are not difficult, that they ask very little of you, that they slide into the place where your humanity used to be as smoothly as a stamped form slides across an assessor's counter. I take up the pale book, and I go where the debt is. I do not steer. The station steers me, or the book does, or the cold does. I have stopped trying to name which, the way I once stopped trying to name where the ink came from, and the not naming is how they keep you. I arrive at some port at the edge of the charts, some rust-rotten spike, or some agri-barge gone sour, or some pilgrim hulk too poor to die, and I stand at the back of the assessor's office in my grey, and I watch for the careful one. There is always a careful one. You can tell him by his hands. He reads the small print. He crosses his sevens hard. He has one tired ship. He loves the way you love a thing that is killing you, and a manifest that will not quite balance, and a litany worn smooth from handling, and when the underclerk stamps his forms, I lift the book, and I make the first mark, and the cold goes out of me and into him, and he tells himself it is the incense. I marked a Tankarla's master on a forge world once. A hard woman with a daughter signed on as her loader, and I followed them 3 ports and watched the daughter learn to read the manifests, the way the boy Wynne had learned, fast and direct, and asking the good questions. And I made the second mark. I knew the daughter would inherit the ship when the account carried forward, and would inherit the debt, and would one day stand at the back of an office in grey and watch for the careful one, and I marked her anyway. Because the book does not permit mercy, and because I have learned, throne forgive what is left of me, that I no longer reach for mercy, even when it is cheap. There was a manufactorum factor whose crates I sealed while he recited the names of his children to me as though the names were a charter that would hold. There was a shrine world tithe master, so certain of the emperor's protection that he thanked me, at the seal, for delivering him to his reward. They each believed, every one of the 411, that they alone had been mistaken to come, that the small grey man was an aberration and an otherwise just accounting, and not one of them understood, until the seal closed, that the small grey man was the accounting, that there had never been any other kind. Only the Navy captain understood, and he was the one who chose the crate. I think of him more than I should, more than the work allows. He was old void discipline to the bone, a man who had given his whole life to ship and rank and the chain of command, who believed the void was a thing to be guarded and not a thing to be sold. And when I offered him the book, he did not even let me finish the offer. He said no. He said it the way you close a hatch against vacuum flatly, finally, with his whole life behind it. And then he lay down in the crate himself before I could lift a hand, and he looked up at me with something I had no name for until much later, when I understood it had been pity. Pity for me, the keeper, who would not have his courage, who would go on holding the book long after his crew were breathing in the dark. And he said only, "A man can refuse, clerk. Remember that you could have refused." And I sealed him. And his breathing was steady and unafraid, and it joined the others. And I have hated him for 19 of my own years, and for 11 of someone else's, because in the closing of that one seal, he proved the thing I have spent everything I had left pretending was not true, that the choice was real, that I could have chosen the crate, that the book was never forced into my hands. I reached for it. I, who only moved what the galaxy sold, reached out across the freezing deck of my own ship while my own crew breathed their first kept breaths below me. And I took the colder thing because it was the thing that cost me nothing, and I have always been a man who took the cheaper price. So now you know what happens when you are a merchant out here in the long dark, where the void is not empty, where everything that can be tallied is tallied, and everything that can be sold is sold, and the smallest wheel turns the cart toward the same grey, unmarked station that waits for every careful man without a single star to light it. You sign the charter. You read it carefully, if you are the careful kind. And the careful reading only lengthens the term and compounds the debt. You carry your own future packed in ice across the screaming dark, and you are far too thrifty to break a single seal and look. And at the end, the small, grey, patient man offers you the crate or the book, and almost all of you will believe, the way I so completely believed, that of course, you would choose the crate. You will not. I have visited 412 of you since I took up the book. I have walked aboard 412 tired ships with my pale tally and my unfinished face, and offered the choice in a voice that is grey now and no longer mine. And I have crated 411 who chose the book, and one only, a Navy man, a void captain of the old, disciplined kind, who would honor the way the rest of us had debt. One who chose the crate, and looked at me with pity while I sealed him. And I have hated him every hour since for the thing he proved about the rest of us. About me. I am setting this account down because the term, even mime, even the reconcilers, is not forever. Even we are carried forward. In the end, when the principle of the self at last runs out and there is nothing left to mark the book with, but a final stroke drawn in the last of one's own cold substance, I can feel it coming. I have begun to forget the hook on my fives. I have begun to forget the smell of the patient dividend and the sound of Dell's laugh, that fuel line laugh, igniting. Soon I will forget that I was ever Garrett Holm, that I loved a tired ship, that I let a boy work for cheap because mercy was once, on one single day, cheap enough for me to afford. And before I forget the rest of it, before I forget that I chose the book over my own crew, that I am the cold now and no longer the debtor, that I have crated 411 careful men who each believed they would have chosen better, I wanted one true page in all these endless lying columns, one entry that no one balanced for me, one figure I set down myself, in what is left of my own hand, that says what I am and not what I was kept as. So here it is, the last honest line in the account. Home G. 1. Received in good condition. Balance forward. The cold is in your hand now. I can feel it from here. It answers to me the way it answers to all of us who hold the book, and it has found you across whatever dark divides us. Set the page down. Do not sign anything. Do not take double the going rate. Do not tell yourself you only move what the galaxy sells, but you will. You all do. That is how the account is carried forward. That is how it found me. That is how it has found you.